Is the lost Gospel of Q the Gospel of Thomas? Could one of the most mysterious ancient texts, the Gospel of Thomas, actually be the long-lost Gospel of Q that scholars have hunted for over a century? If so, it could rewrite everything we think we know about the words of Jesus. Let's follow the trail and see where it really leads. Part 1. The Gospel that never made it into the Bible. What exactly is Q? In biblical scholarship, Q, short for the German word Quelle, meaning source, refers to a hypothetical written collection of Jesus' sayings that scholars believe was used by both Matthew and Luke, but not by Mark. This idea arises from the observation that Matthew and Luke share large sections of nearly identical material, teachings, parables, and sayings of Jesus, that are absent from Mark. Because these shared passages often appear in different arrangements or with slightly different wording, scholars suggest that Matthew and Luke independently drew on this lost source alongside the Gospel of Mark. Q itself has never been discovered, but its reconstruction is based on this overlapping non-Markan material, leading many to view it as an early document of Jesus' words, possibly circulating in the mid-1st century. Despite its appeal, we cannot be certain about Q. There is no surviving manuscript or direct ancient reference. Scholars propose its existence as a solution to the synoptic problem, the study of how Matthew, Mark, and Luke are related. While Matthew and Luke clearly used Mark as a source, they also share roughly 200-250 verses of nearly identical material, such as the Beatitudes, the Lord's Prayer, and certain parables, that Mark does not include. This double tradition is worded too similarly for coincidence, yet often placed in different contexts, suggesting Matthew and Luke did not copy from each other directly. The most widely accepted explanation is that both drew on a second written source, Q, alongside Mark. However, some scholars reject this theory, arguing instead that Luke may have used Matthew directly, or vice versa, a view known as the Farrer hypothesis, which removes the need for a lost sayings gospel. In short, Q remains a hypothesis rather than a proven fact, widely accepted because it explains the evidence neatly, yet still only an educated reconstruction rather than a confirmed historical document. Part 2. An ancient book hidden for centuries. But what is the Gospel of Thomas really? The Gospel of Thomas is an early Christian text, likely composed in the 1st or early 2nd century, and is considered part of the apocryphal or non-canonical Gospels. It is not included in the New Testament. Unlike the 4 canonical Gospels, Thomas is a collection of 114 sayings attributed to Jesus, rather than a narrative of his life, death, and resurrection. Many of these sayings are cryptic, mystical, or focused on personal spiritual knowledge, gnosis, emphasizing self-discovery and the idea that the kingdom of God is within you. Some sayings resemble material in the canonical Gospels, while others are unique, highlighting its distinct theological perspective. Modern scholarship has increasingly explored the possibility of an early composition for Thomas. Stefan Davies suggests that the Gospel of Thomas could have been written before 62 CE, citing saying 12, which commends James as the leader of the Christian movement after Jesus' departure. Since James is believed to have died around 62 CE, Davies argues that this reference implies an earlier date. Elaine Pagels likewise proposes that parts of Thomas may date from between 50 and 100 CE, aligning it with the period of the Apostle Paul, and notes that many sayings in the text are independent of the canonical Gospels, reinforcing its early origin. Despite these early dating arguments, the majority of scholars place the Gospel of Thomas in the late 2nd century CE, roughly 135-200 CE. This later dating is based on factors such as its relationship to the Synoptic Gospels, the tone of certain anti-Jewish sayings, and its theological development. The earliest surviving manuscript, Papyrus Oxyrhynchus I, dates to the 3rd century CE, providing the earliest physical evidence for the text. In all, the Gospel of Thomas remains a fascinating window into early Christian thought, preserving sayings of Jesus that reflect both mystical interpretation and theological diversity within the first centuries of the movement. Part 3. Q versus Thomas. Are they the same gospel? Now that we've introduced Q and the Gospel of Thomas, the question remains, could they be the same or closely related? This is one of the most debated issues in New Testament studies. While mainstream scholarship generally treats them as separate, several lines of evidence suggest a closer connection. The most striking link comes from overlapping sayings. Several Thomas sayings align almost word for word with passages scholars reconstruct as part of Q.
Thomas 9, Matthew 5, 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Thomas 20, Matthew 6, 22-23. On the eye being the lamp of the body. Thomas 31, Matthew 7, 7-8. On asking, seeking, knocking. Thomas 33, Matthew 7, 1-2. On judging others. Thomas 36, Matthew 6, 5-6. On prayer. Thomas 50, Matthew 7, 6. On not giving what is holy to dogs. Thomas 54, Matthew 10, 16-18. On being wise as serpents.
These parallels suggest that Thomas preserves early sayings drawn from the same oral or written traditions as Q. Far from being entirely independent, Thomas intersects with the synoptic tradition in ways that challenge the assumption it is a purely late Gnostic text. Even more compelling is saying 12. The disciples said to Jesus, "We know that you will depart from us. Who is to be our leader?" Jesus said to them, "Wherever you are to go to James the righteous, for whose sake heaven and earth came into being." This reference to James as leader of the Jerusalem church strongly points to an early composition, likely before 62 CE. It indicates that at least some material in Thomas predates the canonical Gospels, reinforcing its connection to early Jesus traditions. If Thomas indeed contains pre-70 CE material, the implications are significant. The overlap with Q is unlikely to be coincidental. Thomas and Q may reflect the same early sayings tradition. One may have influenced the other, or they may have circulated in overlapping communities. Either scenario challenges the conventional late 2nd century dating for Thomas. Later scribal activity likely shaped the text that survives today. By the mid-4th century, Gnostic texts were widely labeled heretical, and scribes may have excised or toned down mystical passages while preserving ethically neutral or Q-like sayings. This could explain why early material, like saying 12, survived intact, while other mystical elements were lost. A similar pattern is evident in the canonical literature. John contains Gnostic undertones, light versus darkness, knowledge as liberation, while Revelation features mystical and apocalyptic themes, yet both entered the canon. Thomas may have been partially sanitized in the same way, blending early sayings with a reduced mystical flavor to survive the orthodox filter. In conclusion, Thomas may not be identical to Q in form, but it is intimately connected to the same early Jesus tradition. Its early content, coupled with overlapping sayings, demands that scholars seriously consider the possibility that Q and Thomas are deeply intertwined, if not ultimately one and the same. If you found this exploration thought-provoking, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical. Until next time, this is the Atheist Apostate, signing off for today.